30th. The topic today is analytics. It's not analytics, big data in the cloud. It could have been. It's governing data management, how it affects personalization and may in fact be impeding privacy. We've got a good lineup of a presenter in Keywall and an excellent panel in Deborah, Blair, and Brett. But I'll let Keywall kick it off shortly. Consider that data is a source of wealth for those who capture data and who analyze it. Some call it the new oil, but it's clearly a basis for profit, but also a foundation for possible problems. We'd like to have a broad discussion today about data management and its governance, the challenges and the necessity and what progress we may or may not be making. But for some, this is the 21st century Wild West. And that's why governance seems to be relevant, particularly in Europe. It's getting attention now in the United States. And we're seeing daily intervention of China and Russia and others in trying to rein in the FANGs, the big data companies. Whether they'll be successful or not, well, that's a little bit of what we'll be discussing today. So without any further ado, Keywall, you've got the stage.
Thank you very much, Perry. I'm going to share my screen. I hope that's okay with everyone.
Yep.
And away we go. And I'll run this presentation. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to talk about the future of information processing, data management, protection of information, data privacy, and I'm going to talk about a number of issues. But just to get started, I thought let's address the challenge and then something about, what is DAMA Edmonton and what is the Iccp, two organizations that I represent. And also what drives certification and what is the data explosion and how does Iccp or others develop certifications? What is the need for data foundations and data literacy, data science, training and collaboration? So I'll just cover some of those areas. The little graphic there shows that I've been selected as one of the 60 faces for IFIP, which is the International Federation of Information Processors. And of course, one of my statements there talks about valuable textual data and multimedia data is available in much greater quantities than the structured business data stored in corporate databases. Processing this data and determining what is false from accurate is our biggest challenge in the near future. The future of information processing requires a greater emphasis on reducing bias in our data and improving accuracy and timeliness of reliable data. So that's our real overall focus. The challenges I find is that, data science is a subset of big data. Data management overrides most of these areas as well as data governance. And there are 11 major areas covered by the DMBOK, Data Management Body of Knowledge. And on our panel today is Deborah Henderson, who's one of the co-editors of the DMBOK from version 1 through version 2. And I think version 3 is on the way. High quality, accurate and organized data in context provides actionable information desired by all organizations, society. And however, we have this issue with escalating data volume, acceleration and the manipulation of images, deepfake videos, fake news, private forums, anti-vaxxers, falsification of identities, cyber terrorism, and ransomware, which is all aided by cryptocurrencies. None of those things are bad in themselves, it's just how we use them. And we face diverse ethical practices and data privacy issues. So we also face, I believe, an industry rife with delayed, over budget, failed computer applications and systems integration projects. And nobody's willing to own up and admit to those. So data management, data science, machine learning, and AI applications that process this data to some kind of deterministic resolution must be able to rely on accurate, unbiased sources of data. However, bias exists everywhere around us. So it exists on the people who design applications, and they're typically the unknowingly biased. They get sucked in by the context of where they live and only in the knowledge that they see through their eyes. Who sets the policy? Well, dominant hegemony at any point in time, be it in a Western society or a non-Western society, that's where the policy gets set on how to use data and how to abuse data. Where does bias exist? Well, it's everywhere. It's embedded in precedents and in law. And then who abuses it? Well, I believe it's the technocrats and the terrorists. So the technocrats really is a big issue. So ethics derives from the constructed reality and organization of society. and the derivation of religions. And in that, we tried to put in freedom of information and protection of privacy, and we want to also, in Alberta, certainly have personal information protection acts, and that governs how we gather, protect, and use our data. However, how well we do it is another matter. So stories in our religions have set our morals, codes of conduct, rights, wrongs, etc., principles, value systems, virtues, dictates of conscience, and legislative policies and procedures and penalties allow us to live in peace and not violate neighbors' rights by giving up some rights to freedom and of information and privacy of information. However, we've become a technocratic monarchy, and then for the sake of convenience, we've given up all these hard-fought rights to control our lives and control our data and complete privacy to the big corporations, who I call the technocratic monarchy. So we follow an ACM code of ethics, which has been developed recently, and Iccp has signed up for that, as well as other organizations. However, who follows those ethics? How do we control our data and protect it? The challenge, I believe, is to provide generally accepted data management principles and standards, along with generally accepted applications development principles and elements of which must include, and these are the 5-6 things I'm going to talk about very briefly, and then Blair, I hope, will add to those a little later on. But the issue for us is that we're not a professional standard body yet. Computing has been around for 60 years, and within that, the data management practice has not evolved properly. So we need a robust industry trusted model of security for our data. That would give us some protection of our privacy of information. We need a core reusable industry-specific data models. We need a global ownership and transfer model, essentially a universal record governance model. And we need to rethink the design of how we store data, the use of primary keys. We have done a really, really poor job of this. And we need to support how we move data from one group to another in a protected way using some kind of blockchain technology, which assures an audit-controlled assurance of accuracy and reliability. And ultimately, we need an application framework and reusable interface designs so we can build robust systems on time and within budget. I have yet to work on an application in my 50 years in the industry where we have been able to get a project done on time and accurate. We require an engineering, production, and continuous quality improvement model, and we need to move from this craft development that we've been doing forever into some volume production and quality control process. So in summary, data science can only produce reliable results based on the unbiased and high quality data receives. And when building applications, we need to assure their reliability and timeliness and delivery on budget. So for the challenge for IFIP and all of the global partners in professional associations is to go through this process of establishing generally accepted data management principles, establish generally accepted application development practices. These are much in the same way that the accountants and the engineers have managed to regulate their industries. We need to establish rapid application development frameworks that are open source, and we need to establish an ISO 9000 style training, implementation, registration, and practice process. And we need to write new curriculum for the universities. The curriculum that's written for the universities today still allows each of the professors to develop systems that do not integrate or talk to each other or think about these generally accepted data management or application development processes. So we need to teach from the first class onwards, data literacy, core data models, unique global primary keys, record governance, ethics, awareness of bias, and how we rapidly produce new applications using reusable modules. So a little bit about DAMA. DAMA Edmonton is an association that I co-founded back with a number of people in 2015. It runs monthly webinars, and we try and keep up to date with emerging technologies and jobs and processes in the data world. We run an annual conference. We also offer online courses, and we work with vendors to establish some kind of research and testing facilities in big data and computing. That's what we're trying to do currently with Snowflake. ICCP, which is the organization I'm the executive director of, was formed in 1973 by the major professional associations. It's managed by a board of directors that represent those organizations. And we offer communities and universities and community colleges and technical colleges nationally normed learning outcomes assessment for the accreditation or reaccreditation. So that's to make sure that the universities are teaching the right learning outcomes out of their educational programs. Now, we offer a lot of certifications at ICCP, and DAMA has one in the CDMP. And these are some of the ones, and there are some exams here that cover the requirement for data scientists. And then, of course, it's entry-level exams and entry-level credentials too. And of course, people want to take exams and certification for advancing in the profession or advancing in the current job or preparing for a new job. When they go through certification, they get more credibility with customers inside and outside the organization. They solve problems quickly. They have greater self-esteem, and eventually they get promoted and get an increase in salary. And of course, companies, employers, employees and HR departments see more productive, more respected, more promotable, and employees that can demonstrate that they fit the job titles and job definitions. And of course, we've split up the data, ISIT data areas in a number of areas: systems development, media, operations, and engineering. Everything above the horizontal line we see is customer facing, and everything else behind the scenes. And there are a lot of certifications that are offered in these areas, both vendor and non-vendor specific. And a lot of people take exams from business services to finance to research. And there has been an incredible data explosion. This is the DMBOK taken from one of the other organizations that have put some more information to it. But DAMA International and the DMBOK, as I said, Deborah through the Education Foundation was the key person in developing this wheel. But we've seen an incredible data-related jobs growth. We see business roles that have huge roles inside them that are all data-related, from chief data officers, business process analysts, metadata managers. And then we've seen a series of IT-related roles that are related to data architects, modelers, model administration, DBAs was, of course, the first one, and data warehouse DBAs and so on. But the hybrid roles that have emerged more recently, data quality analyst, metadata specialist, business intelligence architect, business intelligence analyst, administrator, business intelligence program manager, data scientist, data engineer. These are some of the new emergent roles. So this is taken from Peter Aiken, the president for DAMA International. He feels that data as a topic has confounding characteristics, is complex and detailed, and outsiders do not want to hear about or discuss any aspects of the challenges or solutions to data. Most people are unqualified regarding data architecture or data engineering. It's very poorly taught in the colleges. The focus is always too much on technology, and the business impact is not addressed. And it's not well understood. It has to be relearned by every work group, and there are a lot of poor standards out there related to it. The data management program that's offered out of ICCP covers the DMBOK as well, and people can study for it. In fact, Deborah has taught this program over the past few years, and there are these 11 subject areas and 12 weeks of study that one can go into if you wanted to go into these areas. And of course, we found that over the past while that more and more business people are interested in data, but we need to have a better data foundations, data literacy program. And ICCP had worked with Transforming Data with Intelligence, a TDWI group, to put together the curriculum for a data literacy, data foundations knowledge set that business people can take. The data industry, as I said, has grown rapidly, and we've got big data and data science companies that are growing by the day. And these are some of the ones that are listed here. And of course, machine learning and artificial intelligence companies are growing like crazy. And of course, I had to mention Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, located here at the U of A and a nonprofit downtown, and Alta ML, which is a startup company here in Edmonton. And then also Google with its DeepMind has a facility downtown in Edmonton too. The universities that are leading the fray, Carnegie Mellon is still #1, Tsinghua University in Beijing, University of Alberta are the top 3, where we were #2 at the University of Alberta, we're now #3. And of course, thought leaders like Richard Sutton at the U of A, Yoshua Bengio out of Montreal, Jeffrey Hinton out of Toronto, and Andrew Ng, one of the founders of Coursera out of Stanford. We have a data science exam, of course, that covers all of these areas. And then, of course, there's a 12-week, 12-module course that covers study in these areas. So you can take that from DAMA Edmonton or ICCP or a combined way. If you're trying to get a career planning and skills development profile, you can take any of the exams and get a detailed breakdown of your skills, your strengths and weaknesses. For $300, where else can you get such a detailed breakdown? And then on top of that, if you want to get it over a number of areas, you can get a complete breakdown of about 300 skill sets, or 100 on each area, and have that as your part of your professional development plan that you can work in a rational, organized way. We're also working with Infosys on where in the US or North America, we're working on an integrated HR reskilling and restarting model. A lot of unemployed people. There's a lot of shortage of workers in the IT area. And so we're trying to rapidly train people to move into IT, and we're working with Infosys to do this. How are we doing this? Well, we're offering a lot of our courses within the training partners area, but they have an aptitude assessment, a career counseling approach. Then they focus you on what training you should take, what workshops, other online courses, and then what exams and certification they can have, and then graduate and move into a job. So this is a rapid re-employment, reskilling, redeployment of our national workforce. We're also working on setting up standards for what core competencies a digital team should have. And this is also part of the data-driven decision-making and tech-savvy and ethical people that we want to sort of promote. The Canadian Information Processing Society, I'm a former national president and fellow of this organization. It has a number of ways that you can get the information systems professional, which also links to the IT certified professional from IFIP, IP3, and there's a linkage between Canada and the US for mutual recognition of professional credentials so that we have easy trans-border movement for professionals that are credentialed. And then we work with companies to look at different job types and what exam set would match to different job roles in the companies, and both in the business intelligence and in the data certified data professional area. And of course, you can go onto the ICCP website and take exams. You can go through a process, and then there's remote proctoring available to you in almost anywhere in the world. And we're testing from here through China, through New Zealand, through Singapore, you name it, the services are able to test universally. So what I'm going to close with is that we need a lot of collaborations. We need to have a lot of people working on this generally accepted data management principles area. We need a lot of core models by industry, and we need a different way of creating our unique record identifiers so that we're not recreating primary keys for databases. And we obviously, whenever companies do mergers, acquisitions and mergers, they constantly end up having difficulty in integrating the data. So record governance protocols, we need an ownership and transfer model protocol. We have, and Blair will talk about his enterprise networks thoughts, and we need a secure data exchange using blockchain. And we need rapid creation of new applications. So that's me in a nutshell, and I'd like to pass this on to Blair if Blair's ready for that. Up to you, Perry.
Go ahead, Blair. Blair, I no need to get in the way.
Well, I don't have any slides like Keywall, but I'm just gonna just kind of speak to some of the things that I've gotten into here. And so basically it all kind of, well, first of all, I'll give some background on myself. I started developing systems. I graduated in 1982. In fact, interestingly enough, Keywall was one of the instructors there when I graduated. And in 1984, I started my company, and that company is still operating today, and it's called Method 1 Enterprise Software. And what we do is we create enterprise systems, and we've done this. I've really been involved in this right from the very beginning. And you know, I guess in terms of a definition of what's an enterprise system, you know, in my mind, the enterprise system is that central system that sits in the middle of an organization and manages all the financial and administrative data. And it would have the central contact system. So it's like an SAP, PeopleSoft. To give you an example of some of the work that we're doing, like right now we're working with the Chartered Professional Accounting Association, and we actually started with them back in 2003. But in the recent years, we've been completely recreating their entire enterprise systems. They went through some pretty major changes with amalgamating CMAs and CGAs and CMA, CGA, CAs, and so and they're decent sized organization, 140 people, 30 some thousand members. And basically in our system manages everything. It manages all their finances, it bills out all the revenues, it collects all the cash, it does all the adjustments, and it basically tracks all data in every corner of the application. So that's a pretty good example of we've done healthcare systems, municipal systems, a number of different kinds of systems. But several years ago, I got an opportunity to kind of step outside the box a bit. And so what we did is we went and we got a chance to go into an oil and gas company. And this was, I think, in about 2014. And basically the deal was we got to go into that company and we got all of their data. And then if we found any missed revenues, then we got paid. But we didn't get paid anything if we didn't. And so we took our typical approach that we do when, whenever we go into an organization and create an enterprise system. We started with a data dictionary. We were, reverse engineering systems, getting any data dictionaries that they had. And we basically, that helped us to understand the data. We created a common, we classified the data across all the different systems. Then we had to try to connect it. And in the end, we ended up finding $7.5 million that they missed in billing. And it was because, data gets entered in one system and then it gets entered in another system and it has to get transposed here and here. And, people drop the ball. They cannot keep all the records up to date. And users will sign on and they'll have, they might have 10 different systems, that they would have to manage. And when you go in and you really reverse engineer all these systems, it really exposes some major flaws in the way that our industry approaches systems. And for the most part, what our industry does is, we often create systems by function. In their case, you want a production accounting system, we'll get one of those. You want a contract management system, okay, we'll get one of those. And they had all these different systems. But the challenge is you can't, when we create a system as an industry, that the database that we create for that system is as unique as a fingerprint. It doesn't look like any other database that's ever been created. And you really start to see that when you start to go and look at all these different systems. And, so as an example, with this system, there was well data in it. And, every system had well data. Some had, 20 attributes, some had 30, some had 50. You'd see some common attributes. Oh, well status. So perfect. We got well stats. Well, some have 3 well statuses. Some have 5 well statuses. You start to see stuff like every system has a different methods of primary keys for all the records. So, trying to connect the data is really difficult. And there's tons of common data that exists across all these systems.
So Blair, I'm going to jump in here for a moment. You're an ethical individual. Your firm
Sure.
is in the market and obviously remains in the market because it does good
Yes.
things that appear to be of value. Have you ever fired an employee for an unethical behavior? I mean, you're dealing with the essence of a company when you're dealing with their data. Have you ever found an employee that did something evil? Lost data intentionally or otherwise? Took advantage?
No, I haven't. No.
I'm going to get to you in a minute,
Oh.
Deborah, but I'm going to milk Blair for this, and then we'll get to you. Go ahead, Blair.
Yeah, no, in terms of data, from our perspective, like even when we work with the CPAs or whatever, we demand that any data that is given that comes to us is encrypted or scrambled. And so, you know, we're never working with clients' live data and never want to have their live data. So, so at any rate, yeah, so we, you know, so we don't run into those, you know, issues of, you know, I mean, we have some pretty sensitive, or we would have typically access to some pretty sensitive data, but yeah.
Okay. Deborah, you want to jump in here? I saw you raise your hand, and I know you're still muted though. Unmute. Can you unmute everybody, Claire? There you go.
There I am.
Yeah.
There I am. Thanks. So yeah, I have an experience where a programmer went in and put rogue code into production because they were disgruntled for some reason, and they were in fact fired. And of course, and, you know, under law, they were also charged with, you know, malicious this and that. So I'm not sure of the charge, but yeah, absolutely happens. And, you know, Sarbanes-Oxley and the separation of duties, you know, he was both a developer and could put it into production without review processes and so forth, came into play and were later instituted to control those types of activities. But yeah, yeah, people absolutely do get fired for these types of unethical behaviors.
Are they decertified as a consequence, or is that part of the process?
Well, maybe Keywall can talk about that. I see his comments in the chat there.
Okay, I didn't pick it up.
Yeah. So yeah, I can talk a little bit to it. Yeah, we've taken away the certification for at least 2 people that I know, and these were ethical violations where they were into data they shouldn't be. One was into data. Another one was a local company here in Edmonton, actually, where the network technician was going into data bases where he should never have been anywhere near. But he was identified. We took his certification away, and then he was fired. Now, they did it very quietly. The company didn't want to have a major, publicity around it. And, you know, it's one of the big tower companies here downtown. And eventually he ended up moving out of the city because, you know, obviously it's a small city. Everyone knows everyone else. And you know, that was going to be a major problem for him to get another job here. But he used to be someone who actually worked for me at one time. So it was really embarrassing to have that kind of person end up doing that kind of practice. The interesting thing is that when he moved to another city, he ended up in a even more senior position where there was an inadequate background check done on the person, and lived his life fruitfully, doing same kind of work, a higher salary, living in a much better climate. So I'm sorry, that's not a great example. I have been called. I have been called to identify expert witnesses in some legal cases, and this was regarding whether the person had kept up to date in their skills, and that individual had to prove that they kept up to date in their skills and was current. And so their practice was current, and as a consequence, he actually won his litigation because he had maintained the currency of his knowledge. It's just, you know, they weren't able to prove that he was dated or was using bad practices within the industry.
Okay, before getting to Brent, who might want to elaborate on this as well, Stephen, you've got a question, Kaiser?
I was just going to follow up on the conversation here. So I'm aware of, I'm actually the president of DAMA Edmonton, so I'm well know QL. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that I'm aware of a local company here in Edmonton who has installed data auditing applications to be able to monitor access to sensitive data. And if you access data that you're not entitled to be looking at, that is considered sensitive, you're liable to be removed from your position. So I think there's a lot more attention going into this area by companies now because they realize the dangers of letting people have access to data that they shouldn't see. There's a huge reputational risk for these organizations. So they're trying to, I think, button this down a little bit better than it has been in the past. And I think that's a really good thing. So I just wanted to say that.
So this discussion at this point has been about industry and companies self-regulating, the belief that it is important that we're dealing with highly sensitive information, and with that information, highly sensitive processes that affect people and enterprises and possibly nations as well, whether it be in transportation or health or education. So if the industry can manage the people that have the tools to do good things and bad things, all well and good. Government seems to feel that there's a role it must play, and we'll get to that in a minute. Brett, you want to add anything in here? It's your turn.
I just, you know, when you're talking about the databases and secure databases and stuff like that, I mean, it's, you know, there are some good practices around that, but, you know, the data trail in government and healthcare and, you know, a lot of the industry, you know, is lax, to put it lightly. I mean, you know, it's not hard to pick up a piece of data or you know, rogue data going out somewhere. You know, even from a piece of paper all the way up to, you know, unsecured document repositories. So, I mean, it's there definitely needs more. But once you get into, you know, development and application development and databases, yeah, everybody's all secure about it, but that data going in there, you know, the rules and regulations around that are routinely ignored with social security numbers, personal financial information, and it's, you know, it's not just by industry, it's by government and healthcare. So there's a lot more work to be done.
Obviously, you're raising this because it is an item of concern. What could be done other than, well, what could be done if it's possible to be rogue? If every individual who gets certified or otherwise has the tools to play with data and gets hired, they've got the capability to do something that could be damaging. Who watches? Who's watching?
Well, that's the problem, right? I mean, you look at, you know, with the way government goes, I mean, just even with documents, you know, I've heard of stories where, you know, they'll print off a document and they'll be at one building and it may be a termination letter and they've hit the wrong printer and it goes to a different building across the city, right? I mean, there's stuff like that happening all the time. In AHS, you know, you've got issues where, you know, your person, most of the majority of the hospitals right now are still on paper-based medical records. So they're sitting in a binder on a shelf, unsecured, at the front area there where, you know, there's people walking around all day. And, you know, they're in big thick binders and they pull out pages and pages fall out. I mean, you know, that's just the start of moving the data into those systems. But, you know, there's tons of examples like that across the governments and provincial bodies and your doctor's offices and everything. So,
well,
Yeah, well, I'm working with a bank right now on their privacy concerns and becoming compliant to the CCPA, the CPRA, the California privacy protection rights. And, you know, they've got things in place like an annual security review for and training for all staff. And they have to pass these tests at the end. Their scores are kept. And if they're not doing well, then, you know, they're called on that. They have to sign an annual code of ethics. You know, I think it's well known that the most security breaches or privacy breaches happen because of staff. And so the training, the top of mind, the culture around privacy first and security of data first really has to become endemic to an organization. And, you know, the will has to be there from the top to create these pieces, to remind staff, train staff, and even test staff on, social engineering emails every once in a while. Do you actually click on that link? It's individual behavior that comes down in the end, whether it's and unethical behaviors can be taught. So there is that.
Yeah, and industry is quite good at doing that. I mean, the organization I work for, you have your refresher on security every 6 months, what to do with your documents, your retention schedules, everything like that. It's just with larger organization. Well, a lot of the public sector organizations, there's different rules about both for different groups, and it does get confusing on occasion.
Yeah, and different governments around the world, of course, and in China, they have a very different culture, and culture, trumps everything in terms of, what you think is a privacy issue or not, what you think is a cultural issue, a security issue or not. And, my understanding is that, they have data brokerage in China, in Shanghai and Beijing, where, large companies are mandated to put their data into this kind of stock exchange for data, which you would never see over here. And, what are the implications of doing that? Surely the Chinese government, takes a view off the top in order to deliver services to all of its people. Same thing in Brazil. Every time you make a purchase as an individual in Brazil, you have to give your SSN number or your SIN number to, say, a pharmacy, to a grocery store. And what does the government do with that information? They deliver services, depending, seeing the demographics of purchases across the country. And, you even get rewarded on your income taxes for, how often you have submitted your personal information at the time of purchase. So, different cultures have, markedly different approaches to data privacy and security.
Is that simply a cultural issue, or are these countries aware that there's a new future emerging and government's playing a leadership role in helping take society forward so we can do a better job of seeing that each and every citizen is properly served? Is this really a good news story that the headlights are on in Brazil and China and the rest of are lagging behind?
It's good news and bad news, because any data can be used, as Keywall rightly put out, for good and nefarious reasons. And on one hand, you have, great social planning in China, perhaps, but on the other hand, each individual is given a social index on their behavior, and you can earn points or get, lose points based on your behavior. And you have to have a certain number of points to where you live, what jobs you have, whether you can get married, whether you can buy property, what city you can live in, et cetera, et cetera. And, Ling, please correct me on that, but that's my understanding about the social index, and they're rolling that out.
It's not 100%. It's they starting putting index just like the Canadian or the American system, where every time you pay a credit card on time or not, you're getting the points. So if you go apply for a credit card, apply for a job, someone's going to check your credits, and to see you are worth to trust or not. So they don't have a system like this before. So they are emulating a system like this, but they putting more into it as a modern stage. So I talk to my relatives, friends down there all the time. Some people like it, some people don't like it. The people like it because it's convenient for them. They're not breaking any laws, or they do find things are much easier for them. And some people, concerned, just like what we are here. But let's not forget, a lot of things they are doing is learning from us. In fact, we're helping them developing this. Believe it or not, we actually give them the formula. They are actually behind in a lot of sense. So in China, what they're saying is, we're not just emulating and develop what you do. We're going to be a leap ahead and try to go ahead of that. So that's what they're saying. So far, I have not heard anyone, being harmed or, doing this. But I guess, one of the things are going to be a concern is once they have more data, and as you looking for a girlfriend or boyfriend or job, people could use that to go against you. But again, we are doing exactly the same thing here, right?
So there are cultural differences, clearly. I mean, I think that's the point Deborah's made, and you've reinforced, Ling, that some nations are more tolerant or ready to allow the state to help or otherwise or control. Is there an intergenerational difference here as well? I know, I've been raised around the book 1984 and Ayn Rand and the rights of the individual and how much progress we've made by allowing individual property rights, et cetera. But maybe that's old fashioned. Maybe that's the old days. Maybe the people that have been raised on Facebook and Twitter are a new generation that are less concerned about issues of privacy and personal.
Exactly.
Comment on the intergenerational factor.
So my son is 23 years old, just graduated from UFA. And I ask him this all the time. They don't seem to be concerned at all.
Right.
For them, it's all about convenience. The convenient factors.
Yeah.
So I think, as the old generation, we are getting, by the way, I have a security background. I have a CISSP and I work on a lot of security related projects. Actually, I started about ID, 20 years ago, the project. So I understand the concerns and the reality of a lot of things. And by the way, I work with a lot of healthcare organizations. We talk about data auditing, what allowed, what not allowed. When I spoke to organizations like a large organization provincial-wide, and putting into a restriction on who are allowed to access what data, the leadership is not about concern about security. They are more concerned about disrupt business than security. Because as soon as you're putting a stop on who can see and who cannot see things, you are actually stopping business. So you have to re-engineer business processing. They are more concerned about that than concerned about, who are accessing data is not being accessed, that kind of things. So there's a lot of different factors in play, right? And as a citizen, we talk about, well, my data is being accessed. Well, your data is everywhere. I mean, so, there's a joke here. If you want to make $1 million today, the best thing you do is go to about a house, say, I want my house information according to the privacy law. I want someone to tell me all my information, who has access to it. They probably won't be able to, get information for you. They probably just pay you $1 million to go away.
So we may in fact have an evolution underway of a society that has been raised on the foundations of privacy and protecting the individual's civil rights, being confronted by the fact that maybe our governments are waking up in the West and are becoming aware that there are transitions underway that are generational, that will have implications at the time of an election, that are expecting more from government. I mean, there are parties that run on less government. There are other parties that run on more government, and more government spending more money in your personal interests. Seems we just had an election that in the US and in Canada that we're reflecting of that. I mean, the US is right now debating a bill of $3.5 trillion to do good things. And
so, right. Well, I'd like to pick up on what Ling said, and I totally agree with him that there seems to be, and you, Perry, that things seem to be quite generational, and the younger generation really don't care. They see their data out there, and it's all good, and they get what they want out of social media and so forth. But they do care if something goes wrong. The minute something goes wrong, then they'll be up in arms about it. But other than that, it'll be laissez-faire and business as usual. So where are our privacy laws? They're stuck in the middle somewhere between the generation who cares a lot and the generation who only cares if it affects them negatively. right? And so, as we said, the data can be used for good and bad. And Data for Good is actually an organization. I think it's in Edmonton and Toronto, where people volunteer their time to work for NGOs, charities, to help them, get their business off the ground, and I guess exploit their segment who might be willing to donate. But on a smaller basis, you have trying to do good. Like Ontario government had a program called STARS, Students at Risk. And through profiling geographically what area of the cities we were in, where the alcohol sales were high, where there were a lot of single mothers and poor people, they would identify potentially students who were at risk of dropping out and try to give them more support. But that very same data, if you put it together, could be used to target them for, are they going to be potential drug users, or, more surveillance, and so forth, and, abuse their children. So, there's, I believe that in analytics, we need to have more social scientists involved in the ideation of some of these projects, and privacy folk involved as well. I was involved with a utility here who had 100% monopoly, and they wanted to cut off people who didn't pay well. Well, the government had to step in and stop them. Well, of course, I'm just a little peon at the bottom. But, when the CEO says that this is the direction you want to go with the analytics, I just sit there and kind of scoff. It's like, why do you think you're going to get away with this when there is no alternative for your utility for the services that you offer for these people? It's just unconscionable that these things are even tried. How do these people come up with these ideas?
So, okay, but how do they come up? I think that's really not a question. I think full well where.
Yeah, right.
It's greed. It's all greed.
The book on surveillance capitalism makes it clear.
Yeah.
That
so Perry, let me ask you a question. To everybody. We're part of the privileged group. Like all of us here online, we've got technology at our hands. Our kids have technology. We are letting a very, very large group of people, especially during COVID, fall between the cracks. Those that don't have computers at home, those that don't have any technology support, that don't have financing or any kind of assets to help them through. We really have imprisoned or chained an amazing number of youth and families into a poverty cycle. So, and COVID has exacerbated that. And at the same time, our large technocrats, the technocratic monarchy that we've created, means that an incredible number of people have begun to gather immense wealth, absolutely immense wealth. And so, we're moving from what I used to call the psychopathy of colonialization into the psychopathy of technocratic colonialization. And so we have evolved horribly, I believe, in many ways. So, this is a huge challenge for us. And I think Ling, when he's working with, the junior or youth, that are suffering from autism, sees this all the time. But he may be finding youth with autism in more wealthier families as well as poorer families. And who do we help first? So we've got a lot of challenges here in terms of equalization. So really, when you talk about that your psychology was evolved from 1984 and the readings of your youth, the children also have readings of their youth, and they're different than ours. Mm-hmm. But what I feel is that we really need to emancipate ourselves from some kind of mental slavery that gets to us. The youth of today have a different kind of mental slavery, growing up in India and growing up in a post-colonial world, I had a different mental slavery that the white face is great and the brown face is not great. Today, the kids are, those that have technology are great, and those that don't have technology are not great. So we're evolving a different kind of environment, sad to say, that really is, how do we free our minds from a lot of the poor kids today can't even imagine themselves being in jobs that are technology related.
That was, we did some survey work a couple of years ago, 2 years in a row, in fact, of students in Edmonton and students in Alberta and students across Canada. There were two issues that rose to the top. One of them was rising issues of mental health, which was quite a surprise, but I think you've touched on maybe the basis of that, issues of immigration. But the biggest issue of all was whether they were ever going to get work, whether or not we called it last week a revolution, not an evolution. The rate of change is so great as a byproduct of what your data managers have now made possible. To move data, to move information, to move knowledge at the speed of light, to the point that the professions can't even contain. Their clients now becoming consumers. This is the personalization or the public. It's one of the extremes. We're either moving to a society that indeed recognizes every individual and is very humanistic, or we're controlling every individual at an upper level using data for that purpose. I don't know whether there's middle ground anymore.
No, Kevin's comment in the chat area, which says a new social class structure, is very, very appropriate.
Right.
The real issue is, because of this mental stress and this mental challenge we're facing, we as an individual, I tend to try and live in the present, and life in the present is what I focus on. But that's because I'm mentally strong. I have safety. I have comfort. I've grown up in a culture. I've actually grown up in a culture of shortage, and I've grown up in a culture of plenty. As a youth, I was growing up in a culture of shortage, and when I was in my youth, I used to go through a welfare area where people were living in publicly funded housing, and there was a song that they used to sing back in the day, the kids, and the song was called Never Never Land. And now today we think of Never Never Land, belonging to Michael Jackson. But this was the Never Never Land prior to Michael Jackson's heyday. And the Never Never Land song that they sang was, I'll never have a job. I'll never be able to own my house. I'll never be able to get out of this ghetto, this publicly funded ghetto. I live in a Never Never Land. And then the anger and the violence that grew out of that feeling of inability to rise out of that area was huge. They would just about be angry all the time and want to hit and hurt people around them. And so when you say revolution, we may end up with a revolution of the haves against the have-nots, and that is the ultimate sort of endpoint of where we're headed, and that's a sad state to be in.
Well, you're walking right into what I think is core to all of this, and that is, what is the form of governance for the future?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I also think there's the point to be made that people in the United States, for instance, believe in their exceptionalism of the United States, and also believe that you can rise above where you were born. And both of those things are now becoming known as myths that are being, pulled down. So, if Keywall had grown up in, with the idea that you could, and the hope that was had a community basis that you could rise from your current station, that would have been something where you would not have heard that Never Never Land song, right?
Oh, for sure. But, recognize I come from a land-owning family back in India. So, my mindset was one of a landowner, not of a worker mentality, even though I had to do fairly menial work, early on in my life. I mean, I had 9 jobs before I was 24. So, and I worked a variety of jobs from, dishwasher through sales, door-to-door sales, plus everything in between. But the issue is, we've seen this growing base of radicalism, as again, Kevin has mentioned, and Europe is the base of this growing radicalization. Plus, this demarcation between cultures and races in Europe, which is quite a growing irritation and a point of friction. And of course if we think about it, the politics of the the radicals out there, left or right, whatever you want to call them. I mean, ultimately, politics is meant to divide us. It's meant to divide us into Camp A or Camp B, so the Camp A can win over Camp B, and so it's always about division. So politics, I don't think, will solve that issue. They don't show you. I don't want to say God, because I think about sort of God, religion, and all those other things. But we, as I said, we get our ethics and our way of behavior within culture through how we establish religion and how we establish our instruments. And so there is some obvious linkage there that we have to think through. But I don't think politics is going to solve our societal problems. So really, yeah, we have to rethink a lot of what we're doing. Just in the same way, I mean, I want to get back on topic here a little bit with Blair, who's been advocating for a much better way of designing systems from the ground up, a much better way of educating our students. We've been educating our students to be separatists, right? We haven't been educating our students to be integrators. And in the same way, society has been doing the same. It's been divide and conquer kind of processes throughout politics. And they've been getting radically worse. So I
want to ask you then, because you're in the field of education.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that we've been treating data management as a tool, as an instrument. Do we train data managers to understand humanism? Do we give them any curriculum at all about values, about society, about family, about community? Are they being trained in any way to be sensitive to what it is that as they grow up as practitioners, they're going to be having influence? Now you see people in Facebook breaking away and challenging Facebook or challenging Amazon as staff, saying, hey, you're violating human values. Are our data managers the soldiers of the future, only armed with guns, with no sensitivity whatsoever to the war that they're involved in, either winning, which is bringing and keeping society together, or tearing apart?
Yeah, great question, Perry. Absolutely great question. And Deborah will answer this to you as well in a few seconds. But what we found is that the curriculum designers didn't even consider data and data management. I mean, it's taken Pat Kupali, Deborah, Susan Early, and a few others, a huge amount of effort to try and educate the designers of college and university curriculum to add in components of data management. It's just been a huge challenge. And you're talking about humanism, and we don't even teach bias. We took out of our curriculum statistics, discretion, discrimination, and operations research and efficiency stuff that allowed people to think about what is optimal, what is inoptimal, about human behavior. And we've really gone more and more technology focused in the curriculum. And I think that's been a sad loss. Deborah, would you comment on the curriculum thing? I know you were involved with trying to talk to Iccp and all these others.
Sure. Well, with the advent of the DMBOK, which was in 2005, we put out a white paper on data management and all the aspects of data management. It was taken up by over 300 universities across the world, and we've seen an aha moment where the DMBOK, the data management body of knowledge, like other fields have their bodies of knowledge books, is now a reference across the world for in 6 or 7 languages. And of course, the big uptake is in colleges and universities. So curriculums have moved from data management being just what database administrators do, in a computer science course to being a plethora of courses now. And of course, the first chapter after a general introduction in the DM-BOK is ethical handling of data. Okay, so it's up front, and we're pushing it as hard as we can. That data is just not spit out by applications if they've got the process right in the application. Data, the problem with data is that it is spit out by a process and it lands in a database, but then that process and that application releases that data and it's just sitting there. So what's its proper use? Where did it come from? What does it really mean? What are appropriate uses to it? What is the quality of the thing? Does the quality of the thing actually expand and have the meaning in different areas that you think it does? How should you use it in analytics and reporting and? So the fact that it's released from that process and is just sitting there. The conversation has been for the last 40 years about technology, software, hardware. That's because the vendors can sell you that. They can't sell you your own data. And so data went moot for a very long time. When you bought an application, you were lucky if there was a reporting module off of it, and now data, the software and hardware has, caught up. And now data is finally back in the place that it needs to be, which is that link between business, the consumers, the citizens, our community, and our society. Boy, that sounds really.
Oh, no, it's great. And Deborah, I'm going to say something here, Deborah. 300 colleges or whatever uptake we've had. There are 4,000 colleges in Canada alone.
Yeah.
You're talking about 300 maybe across the US, and globally. And so, we're a drop in the ocean right now.
We are.
And so I feel that it's just been a horribly missed opportunity by and it's mostly because the researchers are too focused on their narrow field of research, be it computing science, information technology, and within those, there's a million sub-slices of everything. I believe that the best way to go at these things is the approach that Blair's offering, which is let's get back to better centralized open source and data management practices that will allow us to develop systems better, develop them cheaper, stop the SAPs from ruling half of the world with they have the same data model, but it's embedded in their own application. PeopleSoft, Microsoft, all of these companies have managed to collect those systems, but control it so that they can literally take every organization in some kind of a monopolistic manner and charge them $100, $200 million for something that's only worth $10,000 to $100,000.
But that's also the reason why analytics has become so important, because if everybody owns SAP and all the modules and processes are the same, how do you do differentiation between you and some other person in your sector? Business in your sector. That means you have to do your analytics that support your decision making to move forward in a more unique way than your competitors.
There's a way, again, Blair might answer this, but I think there's a way that you can still keep your secret sauce, but still have foundational core data models that you can modify in context. Blair, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, for sure. The way even with SAP and us and others, you're not just taking a single model and making, and trying to fit everybody into that model. A big part of what, SAP and what we do and others is you have basically a core system that you start with, and then you're basically augmenting that and extending it out to track what's unique about them. So that could be tracking new types of contacts for them, tracking new types of transactions, building in the uniqueness that business requires. So yeah, I think that there's, it isn't, when we talk about core models and stuff like that, it's really what the real goal is to stop this whole process when you go to create a system of starting it from scratch as if we've never managed contacts before, or we've never managed finances before, because literally that's how the systems are created. When somebody wants a customer tracking system, they say, oh, you got customers, and then they go and they design, you know, some data around customers, and they add some stuff around tracking. And so it's really trying to get to the point that we understand what's core, and we can start to build practices into the core structures so that data is better secured. Right now, it is literally done on a system by system basis. You know, the architects, you know, if you had 5 architects in a room building 5 systems, every one of them would be designing it differently. So, you know, anyhow, so yeah, I really believe that there's it's really, our industry has become experts at creating silo systems and then trying to integrate them. And
that's how we treat. That's how we teach it. Blair, why would the students coming out of university do it any other way when all they're taught is silo system development?
So who has adequate influence to put us on this new path?
Government, the top-down approach. Let me tell you, I involved with my Alberta ID first design. It was a disaster. Try to get all the provincial government, all the departments to agree to using a common set of data. It was a disaster. Total disaster.
Keywall, how much time does the profession spend with government, helping government understand what government needs to do?
Well, it's not about the government. It's about the leadership. Someone will be willing. So that's one thing about in business. We all talk about making decision, even if it's a wrong decision, it's better than make no decision. Because if you make a wrong decision, you move, you learn it's wrong, you correct quickly. Okay. It's better for you to sit there, make no decision, they make no move. That's what's happening.
Can I say something? Can I say something? Because just in a couple of weeks, I'm going to run an op-ed for Research Money, which is a national publication, which works at the intersection of policy, innovation, and investment on the need for getting these IT people out of silos and incorporating some humanities into their core courses so that, you know, there can be change that happens. Because I deal with IT people all the time, and in many instances, I find them extremely arrogant and secretive and unwilling to share information. And I was just so stymied. So I asked actually Ling's son to write me an op-ed, which is going to run in a couple of weeks to address this. So maybe media can get involved, and I'm trying to do what I can.
It's a job security issue. I tell you, when I was working on, so 2002, Alberta government had a great idea. We're going to create a common ID, identity management, for all province. All applications share the same login and using different access model and permission. So great idea. So I started that project as a technical coordinator on the government side. It was a total disaster, total disaster. It's, you know, at the end of the day, I can tell you it's a job security issues. If I tell you everything, my job is not going to be there.
That's true, but I think it was Barry or Blair who talked about many of the core architectural systems that exist, which are not being used. And every time the developers are forced to reinvent the wheel, which is unnecessary, and it goes over time and budget, as Keywall mentioned. So, there is some room for a little bit of maneuvering here, regardless of the security issues, Ling, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're hitting the nail on the head. There is a need for leadership, but that leadership, I suspect, may not come through government. You know, sometimes you're forced into a change because of major disasters. Now, we've had major disasters. I mean, look at the Boeing 737 Max, was it?
Yep.
I mean, talk about an ideal opportunity to change computer systems and computer programming, based on, but the Boeing hid all of that information for years.
Yeah.
And a lot of the programmers, as as Ling mentioned, it is all about job security, and IT, in my experience, IT is the department that wants to change the least, because they have so much invested time in building up a skill set in a particular narrow domain. And so what Blair is trying to do is and I'm trying to help him as much as I can through ICCP and DEMA, is that we want to bring together a production mentality where everything should be on a mass production, but highly customizable. If you think about the e-commerce market today, it is a mass customization to a unit of one.
Right.
Think about the change in mass production from Ford onwards. We now are in the electronic commerce market space of mass customization to a unit of one person, you.
This is what I've referred to as personalization.
Exactly. Yes. So, but I've taught e-commerce for many years at McCune University, and one of these this was the way I always described it to them, that we're changing to a mass customization to the unit of one, and you are the production as well as the end product in service, and it's a service economy that we live in. So everything is all related to service. So in that context, what Blair is trying to do is build systems so that these application developers, they don't become craftsmen. They're not I mean, I grew up in England when, if you called a plumber in, the plumber would hide all the information about what they were doing and what product that they needed, how to fix things. And only they could get access to those items from the specialty stores that provided plumbing supplies. Now, later on, the do-it-yourself centers grew up, and then, more information became available. North America in the 70s was leading the world in giving or making available information to its customer base. And that was a major demarcation point between North America and Europe. And of course, now the internet has just exploded the access to information. And that's made an actual equalization and stop these tradesmen from controlling things. What Blair is saying, let's get into these do-it-yourself centers so that we can make everybody a producer and build new applications instead of these very, very smart craftsmen who try to control what new system is being built.
In order to achieve this end, and I'm not sure that one needs to really intervene, because I think the market's going to pull us there. I think this drive for personalization is really being driven from the bottom up. It's a pull. People have education, they have access to the internet, they have tools, most do anyway, and are demanding that you serve me. And the Amazons are getting it right with their e-commerce and with the gathering of data. Now, the impediments to achieving personalization on the scale you're talking about is a concept called privacy. It seems to me that those institutions and those regulators that say, I want to protect privacy, are actually the impediments to the achievement of personalization. And the other thing that's an impediment is the professions themselves, which are silos. How do we break down those barriers? Well, I think they're being broken down by, again, the client one step above a slave in Roman times, becoming a consumer and demanding what they want. This is a form of positive anarchy. The anarchy that's underway is the breaking down of all these barriers that have been built as we were building supply in society, to now that we have supply, asking whether that supply is really there for the purpose of serving a person or there to serve the suppliers.
Well, there's always a way through, there's always a way through privacy law to get to an individual and for personalization. It's through segmentations and doing statistical segmentations on a population. You use data that's publicly available from all sources and anonymized, as it were. Mm-hmm. But, here in Toronto, You know, I looked at my profile from one service, and yep, I was English speaking. Yep, I lived in that kind of house. I had a van and a sedan and 2.5 kids and a pet, either a dog or cat. And, you know, they had me down to that and more. So, you know, even though it's illegal to re-identify individuals, Harvard also did a study saying it only takes 7 steps to re-identify an individual. And I can believe that from my own personal experience. So that's how personalization happens now. And, you know, they're getting very good at it in terms of, you know, also your behavior, whether you, you know, you might be sucked in. Maybe rogue advertisers might advertise to you because you've had a, you know, some significant event happen to you in the family, and you know that they might know that just from Google Analytics and where you've gone and so forth. So personalization is happening regardless of the privacy law, and the privacy law is meant to just rail in, I guess, private business in terms of giving the person the sense that they own their own personal identifying data, as opposed to us being personalized through these profiles.
That's what has to happen, is that the data has to go back to the individual. I was working with Tech Nation probably about a year or so ago, when the Liberal government was trying to come up with a data strategy, something like GDPR for Canada. And it was the Minister Navdeep Bains, and their concept was the individual has the right to their data. And, you know, the data has to be treated from an individual perspective like a commodity, like your bank, right? You may have, you know, eventually an institution like a bank will help you manage your data. But once you have your data and you're able to use it, and use that, you know, for your own benefit, as opposed to Amazon or Google or Facebook using it, you're going to make better decisions as an individual. You're going to make, you know, you're going to be able to decide, you know, utilize your data to make your life better, right? So I think there's, and it also allows for a little more security, but the data has to go back to the individual and be owned by the individual. It's got to be treated as commodity eventually. Everybody else is treating it as a commodity. They're making money off your data. You as an individual should be able to trade, sell, do whatever you want with that data. Use it to make better decisions. Put it into a crowdsource so you can make better decisions as a group, or come back and decide. But it's got to go back to a tradable commodity.
Do you want to comment on that, Blair?
Yeah, I think that I guess, you know, I am a practitioner. I'm actually designing and developing systems and creating them, and right in the weeds on all that stuff all the time. And you know, so you know, I look at all the challenges of personal and identifying information and how to manage that. And you know, we've been, you know, kind of coming up with ideas in terms of how that might work. And you know, so it's just really, so I'll just share what that idea is. It's an idea like, you know, if you guys have heard of Snapchat, where you basically, you get access to a video and then you lose your access at a you know, a certain period of time. It's kind of like that. So you would, when you went into an organization that needed your personal information, you would use your phone. It would basically it would be that security token to gain access to the data. And then that data doesn't come back as a whole package that gets integrated into your database. Instead, it comes back as something that you can view, and you have limited access to it, and then it goes away. And you still get all the necessary header information, so you can link all your other data to it. But I guess the key point here is, and it gets back to coming up with a core system and a method of creating software, is you know, something like blockchain became extremely successful because somebody, you know, everybody got an idea of how to do it. and then they blended it into technology. And the same thing could be done with like a core kind of system where we perfect ideas, and then it becomes accessible to everybody, so that every architect out there is not trying to solve that exactly same problem. And so it's just another reason to invest in perfecting a core structure and a core system. And so that's I guess would be my key thing. So there's ways to do it, and let's not have 100,000 architects try to figure out how that's done.
Well, we're back to leadership again.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and I love the description you just gave, Blair, on blockchain as an ideal example of how it's taken force. So thank you for that. That's a very good visual for me, mental visual.
We're coming.
I want to add one thing,
Go ahead,
Perry. So you talk about a lot of personalization, that market is driving it. It is true. If you look at a 50 years, 100 years history, but that's in the economy, it's not the same scale and the linkage we have today. So if we're using the same method, using the market-driven and the personal choice, I think we're going to lose out. We won't be able to compete with other nations who are using a different approach. So if you look at China, it's one approach, but just not look at China, look at Asia as a whole. Japan is doing the exact same thing as China. It's a different system. It's a Western style system, but they're doing exactly the same thing as China. They just don't talk about it, right? So if Canada wants to compete in the world stage, I mean, so unless you make everybody else do what you do, slow moving, using market-driven, and using personal choice, or you have to compete with other people. So here's a choice we have to make. I think that's my view of this. And that's the reason I did what I did, is I don't want to wait until other organizations to make the change for my son. So I'm going to change myself.
But that's market driven. I mean, I think what you're articulating there is, when frustrated by a slow response of corporations or slow response by government, the individual in our society will act. That may be more difficult than under other political systems.
But I'm only looking at a very small pond, right? Just for autistic youth employment. That's what I'm interested in. And so when I spent 7 years research, trying to find a repeatable model, and people can, I actually went to certain business, try to bring them to Edmonton. Too small, not enough business, all reasons. So I decided to do it myself because I can't wait.
Yeah.
The innovations that we speak of, we've been speaking of for the last hour and a half, are innovations drawing on data. Which systems are the ones most likely to be the most innovative? And it seems to me, Ling, you've just reinforced the relevance of a society that allows individual initiative to rise to the fore, to address personal issues that may, in fact, like Zuckerberg or Gates, ultimately become public issues and public solutions. I'm not so ready to throw away the opportunity for individuals to be the engines of our future.
Perry, I agree with you 100%. I mean, and again, a real comment in the chat is, necessity is the mother of invention. Great. And I agree with that. However, I've tried to address, how can we have broad change in a society come about? And what nations are set up to make broad change happen at a nation state level, and where will it be unsuccessful? And so I've come to the conclusion that, 2 states that could do it, one was Cuba and the other one was China, because they're state-driven, let's go one direction societies, and everyone has to follow. I've also looked at, why is it that different levels of discipline exist in countries such as India or other nations where rampant lack of discipline or rampant bribery or other unethical practices have taken hold. And how do you control those societies, and how do you move them forward? And in some cases, it requires a stick, and in other cases, obviously, it requires a carrot. So we govern these states differently based on some of the disciplines. The other thing that I've tried to observe over the years is, why is it that when people come from a lack of discipline area and a lack of discipline or ethical practices area, and then when they get into a country where the standards are higher and the legal systems enforce proper behavior, why is there an instant change in them to now reflect the values and mores of the society that they moved into? And so a lot of it comes down to enforcement. A lot of it comes down to having the right legal and ethical practices in place. And it really is a requirement to have the right legal framework and the clean operating implementation of that legal framework for things to happen. And so that's why I say in some countries it needs the stick, and in other countries it needs the carrot.
Clearly, the variables that we're talking about are so complex that for a system to evolve that touches on every element of what it requires of change that is required in order for that system to be introduced, working from the top down seems to me has been tried and has proven to fail over and over again. I mean, maybe Cuba can pull it off, and then you get stuck in whatever Cuba happens to put in place because it's reluctant to move off that destination. I'm going to wrap this up now that we've only got a minute. But before I do, are any last minute comments? Jackie, do you want to make a comment as you're getting ready to wrap up? Mel, I haven't heard from you today. Any comments you want to make prior to the wrap up? Mel?
I've basically been the student here today, listening to the masters, and I got to say thanks to everyone here for your contributions to this thing. This has just been excellent. I do have a few general comments, but they're sort of at a higher level. I think in one, my background is in chemical engineering, and I wrote my first program back in, I don't know, 1965, 64, or something like that. And I've been doing software product management for a long time, retired about 10 years ago, and kept getting more and more interested in a lot of things. And one of them really is a lot of this topic that we've been talking about here today. So benefit can come from the use of data by a lot of people. And you can get that by allowing them access, secure access to a data source. But you can also provide copies to them, which can be dangerous because you don't know where it's going to go. So you've got to balance that benefit against the risk that comes from whatever decision you make there. So what is the general consensus here of how we can maximize the benefit and minimize the risk in access and use of data for the betterment of everybody?
I think that is a good point of wrap up, because I think that has been at the essence of what we've been talking about today. My overview is that as we've discussed data, putting it in the context of a metaphor that we're all today familiar with, data is the virus and education is the vaccine. I don't think we can rely on government. I think government acts too slowly, and in a democracy, there need to be forces that are significant enough to warrant getting elected to expect that government is going to, in fact, be the advanced leader. Keywell pointed out there are cultures, as has Ling, that are more forthright, where government takes an autocratic position, sees the future, and takes action. That's called utopia. And I'm personally not confident that any government has that much foresight that I would be that we would be willing to put our full trust in that government to take us into that new future. But I thank you, Deborah, for joining us today. Thank you, Blair, and Blair, I wish you every success in bringing about the integration that you wish to see. Duncan, thank you for bringing some insights in terms of where government's at, as disappointing as it is to hear it. And Keywell, I mean, keep it up. I don't think I ever appreciated you as much as what I've heard today and your background. You're well positioned to